So I'd like to talk about something nice and quick. Sort of the inconsistencies with Legacy's stylization to Generation 1. Why I have concerns moving forward. But first let's quickly get out of the way some things that are basically just Generation 1.5, especially here with Generation 2. Generation 2, they just directly translate, because it's basically the same style as Generation 1. To a degree, the same goes for Beast Wars in general, and even the anime shows that are within Generation 1. The comic books, the Generation 1 based comic books, like the 2005 IDW, they directly carry over. Same with Diaclone, they directly carry over. Now, as for Prime, let's say, starts the first classification of these Generation 1 stylizations. So, Prime Bulkhead, they've translated to originally with his proper figure for the Prime line very well, showing they can translate this design. This is what they did for Legacy. Now this is part of a grouping I like to consider just flat out Generation 1 versions of the character based off of that character. So while it may say on the packaging Prime Bulkhead, it really just seems more like Generation 1 Bulkhead. They did kind of the same thing with Knockout, though admittedly they probably need to do a better Knockout figure for his normal self. This looks like it could be a Generation 1 version of him. In fact, if I remember correctly, some of the newer comics had indeed used this as Generation 1 Knockout. Prime RC. They've been, again, able to translate it to a figure before. Looks the most like the original design, yet also suffers heavily from needing to be able to be turned into other characters. Because it really kind of just... Whoops. Got a little head with that. It really took some hard hits, especially around... Well, the limbs are fine. Once you get to pretty much any detailing above the limbs or between the arms, you now have what works better for Warflame and G2 Road Rocket than Prime RC. Mainly too wide. You have the original RID show of Robots in Disguise, Scourge, his original toy, and his Legacy toy. I will say, admittedly, this one, I don't know about the rest of the figures that might come out or might not come out for his continuity. In this case, he kind of gets to cheat it a little because that is Generation 2 Optimus Prime mold. And as I mentioned with G-Axis, if I scroll all the way back, they directly translate Generation 2 to it because it's basically just Generation 1. If I scroll back, next up we have kind of the beginning. They pretty much do it accurate, but with stylization to make it fit in a bit better. So, Prowl. Legacy Prowl. He's a little chunkier. His head's missing a lot of chin. But otherwise, it looks decently enough to, like, it's recognizable as that specific version of Prowl without being drastically different. I'm pretty sure this is Override. I don't really know Cybertron very well. Yeah, Override. Original toy, legacy toy. Again, carried over rather accurately with a handful of stylizations into more Generation 1 style. Cybertron Metroplex. Original toy. A legacy figure. Again, for the most part, just a straight carryover of the design. Armada Optimus. Original toy. Rather straight carryover of the original design. Notice any patterns with these guys, starting with Prowl. These guys get roughly a carryover of their original design, seemingly Cybertron and Armada more than animated, but they still have more or less their original design intact, if not really accurate to their original design. Megatron. Original toy, legacy toy. Starscream from Armada. Original toy, legacy toy. They're all really rather accurate, straight to what they had been before. Pretty much carried over more or less the exact same. Hotshot, original toy, legacy toy. And then we get to Skyquake, where it seems they've now selected a third option. An option I don't actually think is that good. Though I seem to potentially be in the minority on that. We have his original toy, we have his legacy toy. His legacy toy reminds me more of Generation 1 Skyquake. Heavily. To the point of it looks more like they just slapped his head, arm shoulder pylons on, and an Earth cockpit. Just glued to G1 Skyquake's jet mode. And called it a day. It looks way too similar to this for me to feel it being Skyquake. Now I will note, also I should quickly note, this is the Generation 1 Skyquake toy. This was their original concept design that they were going to use before they ended up changing it to this. I actually don't mind how this looks. Again, this fits that original grouping that I ended up pointing out of Bulkhead and Knockout, of looking like they could be a flat-out Generation 1 version of the character, yet it's still labeled as the Prime version of them. This looks like it could easily just be Generation 1 Skyquake. Being a separate character from this Generation 1 Skyquake, but basically being a separate guy that shares the name but has the look roughly of the Prime Skyquake. This looks like someone kind of it looks like it's halfway between wanting to be Generation 1 Skyquake and Prime Skyquake. Probably actually more like 75% of the way towards being Generation 1 Skyquake than Prime Skyquake. And it doesn't look good to me because of it. Because it feels more like, okay, what they want is just flat out Generation 1 with the Prime elements just attached on. That would make more sense if you were trying to attach, if you named it that doesn't fit for it being supposed to originally be the Prime character, it feels to me. If it were supposed to be like roughly the Generation 1 character in the Prime universe, maybe. I still don't think this design is good, but I could see that potentially being a bit better. Yeah, I have seen the leaked pictures for Shadow Striker. I did not include that here because I know some people want to wait to actual reveals. All I'm going to say is it follows a similar pattern as with these two. Except it does seem to lend itself more towards the character it promotes itself as in vehicle mode. In robot mode, it still has kind of the issue of it wants to be both, and it looks kind of like the Generation 1 version is beating them out, rather than it being the version it's promoting itself as. So I hope we either start sticking to stuff like the Armada figures, where they almost directly translate, or go back to stuff like this, but end up being more explicitly Bulkhead in Generation 1 or something like that, based off of and then the universe. Because as it is, unfortunately, I might have to drop getting characters that did not exist in Generation 1 as variants of themselves, because it will look like it's simultaneously both and neither, or the Generation 1 version over the other character. So then, why not just wait for Generation 1 Skyquake? They clearly are most likely gonna make Generation 1 Skyquake. This already looks too much like Generation 1 Skyquake to me. I'll just wait for them to make him. But yeah. Yeah, so there is indeed a consistency problem, and it probably comes from stuff like this, where they had ended up halfway through taking their design principle for some of the figures, and then completely turning it on its head. I mean, even as it is currently, I don't know that this would look good standing alongside the Knockout and Bulkhead, because it will so drastically look different, because it has so much less of just that specific character. Yes, not accurate to the original design, but if you look at this, you can see a Generation 1 bulkhead. If you look at this, you can kind of see a Generation 1 knockout. When I look at this, yes, I can kind of see Prime Skyquake, but it almost looks like Generation 1 Skyquake cosplaying as Prime Skyquake, with this cockpit looking like it was just glued onto a Cybertronian jet, and looks horrendous.